Victoria had always believed in financial independence, but she also believed in love. When she married Jake 8 years ago, she never imagined she would one day be keeping secrets from him. At least, not the kind of secret she was keeping now. It had started innocently enough. Back when they were dating, Victoria was just another struggling consultant, working long hours for unpredictable pay. Jake, with his stable job in marketing, had taken pride in being the provider. He never said it outright, but Victoria could tell. He liked the idea that she depended on him, even if just a little. He liked paying for dinners, covering rent when her income was slow, and feeling like the one in control of their finances. At first, Victoria hadn't minded. She loved him, and she saw no harm in letting him take the lead in some areas of their life. But as the years went on, things changed. Victoria's work started to take off in ways neither of them had expected. It began when one of her consulting clients, impressed with her ideas, asked if she would be interested in helping him with a new project. That project turned into another and then another. Before she knew it, she had built a reputation in her field as someone who could transform businesses with her insights. She was good at what she did, better than she had ever realized. Then came the real turning point, an idea for an online business. Victoria saw a gap in the market, something no one else had quite figured out yet. She hesitated at first, doubting herself, but eventually took the risk and built something from scratch. The first year was slow, but then things exploded. By the time she was making her first million, she and Jake had already settled into a pattern. He worked his regular job and she freelanced. He never asked too many questions, assuming she made just enough to contribute her share of expenses. In reality, she was quietly accumulating a fortune. Victoria never set out to hide the truth from him. In the beginning, she simply didn't mention the details. She had separate accounts for her business, separate investments, and a separate financial world that Jake knew nothing about. At first, it was just a matter of convenience. Then, over time, it became something else, something she feared would change their relationship if it ever came to light. There were weeks of silence, sitting in the bowling alley, penitentiary magazines hurting through his skull, the topic of the time. Because the more successful she became, the more she noticed something unsettling about Jake. He had always prided himself on being the man of the house, even though Victoria had never challenged that role. He liked to make decisions about money, even when she was the one contributing more. He complained about their budget, talked about tightening belts, and acted as though they were barely scraping by, when in reality, Victoria could have paid off their mortgage in cash if she wanted to. So she kept quiet. She let him believe what he wanted to believe. It was easier that way. She told herself it didn't matter, that their marriage was about love, not money. But deep down, a part of her wondered, if he knew the truth, would he still see her the same way? Lately, though, things had been changing between them. Jake had grown distant. He worked late more often, kept his phone close to him at all times, and seemed irritated by even the smallest things she did. Victoria tried to ignore it at first, convincing herself that every marriage had rough patches. But then there were the whispers of doubt, the subtle signs she couldn't ignore. The way he suddenly started dressing better, wearing cologne she hadn't bought for him, the way he would get defensive if she asked about his day. And then there were the nights he came home late, smelling of wine and something else, something unfamiliar. She told herself she was imagining things, that it was just paranoia, that Jake would never do something like that to her. But deep down, she knew. She just wasn't ready to face the truth yet. Victoria had always prided herself on being logical, on not jumping to conclusions without proof. But when she found the first undeniable sign of Jake's affair, logic didn't make the pain any easier to bear. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening. Jake had gone to a work dinner, one of many lately, and Victoria found herself alone in their shared home once again. She had tried to keep herself busy, answering emails, reviewing some business reports, but her mind kept drifting back to him, to the way he had been acting, To the late nights, the unexplained absences, the sudden irritability when she asked harmless questions. She hadn't gone looking for proof, not really, but when she walked into the bedroom and saw his work laptop sitting on the nightstand, a nagging thought tugged at her. Jake had never been particularly careful about his devices before, but lately he had kept his phone locked and his laptop closed whenever she was around. He had changed the passwords on his accounts, citing security reasons. For the first time in their marriage, Victoria hesitated. She wasn't the type to invade his privacy. She had always believed that trust was the foundation of their relationship. But that trust had been eroding, piece by piece, and now she felt like she was standing on shaky ground. Before she could talk herself out of it, she lifted the laptop's lid. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. His email was open, the last message still on the screen. "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible." Her stomach twisted. She stared at the words, her breath caught in her throat, as if reading them again might somehow change their meaning. But they were still there, clear as day, along with the name of the sender. Lauren. A name she didn't recognize, but she didn't need to. The words spoke for themselves. Victoria's hands shook as she scrolled through the thread, her heart pounding harder with each message. Lauren wasn't just some casual fling. This had been going on for months. Sweet words, intimate confessions, inside jokes she wasn't a part of. The way Jake spoke to this woman, it was as if he had completely checked out of their marriage, and not just being forgiven, they had been quarreling. She took a part of her wanted to slam the laptop shut and pretend she had never seen any of it. But the other part, the part that had suspected this all along, forced her to keep reading. And then she found the worst message of all. "I wish I could just be with you already. Victoria is so boring. She doesn't even try anymore." Victoria felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Boring. That word kept echoing in her mind. After everything she had built, after everything she had done for them, he saw her as boring? Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. She had spent years supporting Jake, being the wife he wanted her to be. She had let him believe he was the provider, had downplayed her own success just to keep the balance in their marriage. And this was how he saw her? As an obstacle? As someone he had already checked out on? She closed the laptop and sat in silence, her entire world shifting around her. By the time Jake came home later that night, she had made a decision. She wouldn't confront him. Not yet. She wanted to see how far he would take this. Over the next few days, Victoria watched him more closely than ever. She had always believed herself to be a good judge of character, and now she saw Jake for what he really was. The way he pretended to be exhausted from work while texting someone under the table, the way he barely looked at her during dinner, distracted by his phone, the way he rolled his eyes when she talked about her day. She could have called him out right then and there. She could have thrown his laptop in his face and demanded answers. But she didn't. Instead, she started preparing for what came next. She quietly contacted a lawyer, made sure all her finances were secure, and started the process of separating their assets. Jake still had no idea how much money she had, which meant she could walk away from this without him trying to take what wasn't his. And then, one evening, she finally confronted him. She waited until he was getting ready for bed, scrolling through his phone with the same distracted expression he always wore now. "I know about Lauren," she said simply. Jake froze. For a second, he didn't say anything. Then, slowly, he set his phone down and looked at her. "What?" His voice was too casual, too rehearsed. Victoria didn't flinch. "I saw the emails. I know you've been seeing her." His expression shifted, first to shock, then to anger, then to something else. Relief. As if he had been waiting for this moment, as if part of him was glad the secret was finally out. "Well," he said, running a hand through his hair, "I guess there's no point in lying then." Victoria swallowed, waiting for some kind of apology, some sign that he regretted what he had done. But none came. Instead, he sighed dramatically and leaned back against the headboard. "Look, Victoria, you had to have seen this coming." She blinked. "Excuse me?" Jake shrugged. "I mean, come on. Our marriage hasn't been great for a while. You've been so focused on your work, on your little projects. We barely even spend time together anymore." "Little projects." Victoria clenched her jaw. "Is that your excuse?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. He sighed again. "It's not an excuse, it's just the truth. You've changed. You're not the same person I married." Victoria stared at him, a million thoughts running through her mind. She could have told him then and there about her success. She could have thrown the truth in his face, told him that while he had been sneaking around with another woman, she had been building an empire. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled. "You're right," she said. "I have changed." And with that, she stood up and walked out of the room. Jake didn't follow her. He didn't realize it yet, but that was the last night they would ever spend under the same roof. Jake moved out 2 weeks after Victoria confronted him. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting matches, no desperate pleas for forgiveness. In fact, he seemed almost relieved, as if getting caught had freed him from the burden of pretending to be a faithful husband. Victoria watched in silence as he packed his things, stuffing clothes into a duffel bag and making half-hearted attempts to act like this was just another step in life. "I guess this is for the best," he said as he zipped up his bag. "We've been drifting apart for a while, Victoria. You have to admit that." She said nothing. Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I don't want this to be ugly. We'll go through the divorce, figure out the logistics like adults. No need to make it messy." Messy. Victoria almost laughed. He had no idea how easy she was making this for him. He had no idea that if she wanted to, she could have turned this entire thing upside down. She could have fought him for everything, dragged him through a brutal legal battle, made sure he walked away with nothing. But she didn't. She let him think he was leaving on his own terms, that he was the one walking away with dignity. She didn't mention the lawyers she had already hired, the airtight financial separation she had secured before even confronting him. She didn't mention that the house, her house, was already protected, that he would never get a cent of what she had built. Instead, she simply nodded and watched as he slung the bag over his shoulder. "I'll have my lawyer send over the papers," she said, her voice emotionless. Jake hesitated for a second, as if he had expected more of a reaction from her. Maybe he had wanted her to cry, to beg him to stay, to make him feel important one last time. But when she just stood there, unmoving, he gave a small nod and walked out the door. And just like that, he was gone. For the first time in years, the house was quiet. Victoria stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the stillness. It should have felt lonely, she supposed, but it didn't. It felt peaceful. She had spent so long making herself smaller for Jake, letting him believe he was the strong one, the successful one, the man in the relationship. Now, she was free from that weight. But the real moment of clarity came a week later. Victoria had gone to her favorite cafe that morning, the same one she had been visiting for years, but this time she allowed herself something she hadn't in a long time. She paid attention to the little luxuries. She ordered the expensive coffee without thinking twice. She tipped the barista generously. She sat by the window, enjoying the morning sun, and let herself appreciate the fact that she could do this. And that's when she saw him. Jake, walking hand in hand with Lauren. Victoria hadn't actually seen the woman before, only the emails, but there was no mistaking her. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with long blonde hair and a bright smile. She clung to Jake's arm like a trophy, laughing at something he said. Victoria watched as they walked into the cafe, completely unaware of her presence. "Babe, get me the oat milk latte," Lauren said, still holding on to Jake. And maybe a croissant. Ah, this place is so cute. Jake chuckled, reaching for his wallet. Yeah, I got it. Victoria raised an eyebrow. She knew Jake's financial situation. His marketing job paid decently, but it wasn't enough to support the lifestyle he was trying to step into. He had always been careful with money, the kind of man who stressed over their grocery budget, who complained about wasting money on overpriced coffee. But here he was, playing the role of the provider again. Victoria didn't linger. She had no interest in making her presence known. Instead, she finished her coffee, left an even bigger tip than usual, and walked out without looking back. The magazine cover came out 3 weeks later. It wasn't something Victoria had planned. It was just another interview, another business feature about her success. She had done plenty of them before, but this one was bigger. The title was bold, impossible to ignore. The Woman Who Built a Multi-Million-Dollar Empire in Secret. The article detailed everything, how Victoria had started from nothing, how she had grown her business into a massive success, how she had been running a financial empire while people underestimated her. The moment the issue hit newsstands, her phone started buzzing. Friends congratulated her, clients reached out with admiration. Even some distant family members, who had never paid much attention, suddenly wanted to reconnect. And then, one night, she got a message from Jake. Jake, wow, just saw the article, didn't know you were some kind of millionaire genius. Victoria stared at the message for a long moment, before typing back a simple response. Victoria. I know. A few minutes later, another message popped up. Jake, can we talk? She smiled to herself. Of course he wanted to talk now that he knew what he had walked away from, but she had no interest in looking back. She turned off her phone and poured herself a glass of wine. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. Victoria knew the message would come. She had expected it the moment she saw Jake's name pop up on her screen. It was only a matter of time before he realized the full weight of his mistake. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she let the message sit there, unread, as she poured herself another glass of wine and settled onto her couch. The city skyline stretched out before her, the lights glittering like 1,000 tiny reminders of how far she had come. For years, she had lived in Jake's shadow, allowing him to believe he was the stronger one, the one in control. And for what? So that he could throw her away the moment he found someone younger, someone who stroked his fragile ego? She wasn't angry anymore. She was just done. The next morning, her assistant forwarded a voicemail from an unknown number. Jake. His voice was hesitant, unsure in a way she had never heard before. Hey, Victoria. I saw the article. I guess I never realized how much you had accomplished. I mean, I knew you were smart, obviously, but... He laughed awkwardly. $4 million a year? That's insane. Anyway, I was thinking maybe we could grab a coffee or something, just to catch up. Victoria rolled her eyes. Catch up? This was a man who had barely looked at her in the last year of their marriage. A man who had walked out of their shared home without a second thought, without even bothering to ask if she was okay. And now, suddenly, he wanted to catch up? She deleted the voicemail without replying. Over the next few weeks, Jake's attempts became more frequent. He started small, text messages, casual greetings, as if they were old friends who had simply lost touch. Jake. Hope you're doing well. Jake. Saw your business mentioned in another article. Super impressive. Jake. Would love to grab coffee sometime, just as friends. Victoria never responded. Then, the messages became more personal. Jake, I miss talking to you. Jake, I've been thinking a lot about us lately. Jake, I made a mistake, Em. That one almost made her laugh. A mistake? Jake had made a choice. A deliberate, selfish choice. He had thrown away their marriage, discarded her as if she were nothing more than an obligation he had outgrown. And now he was realizing that he had left the wrong woman. One evening, while scrolling through her phone, Victoria's curiosity got the better of her. She typed Jake's name into social media, something she hadn't done since their divorce was finalized. His profile was still there, still public, and right at the top, a new relationship status. Jake Miller is single. Victoria smirked. So, Lauren hadn't been the fairy tale romance he had imagined. Digging a little deeper, she found Lauren's page. Her last few posts were vague, passive-aggressive quotes about betrayal and wasted time. Some people don't realize what they have until it's gone. Lies always catch up to you in the end. Never settle for someone who treats you like an option. Victoria could practically piece together the story just from those posts. Lauren had left him. Or maybe Jake had left her when he realized she wasn't the upgrade he had hoped for. Either way, it didn't matter. The final attempt came on a Friday evening. Victoria was at home, curled up with a book, when her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She let it ring, assuming it was another voicemail she would ignore. But then, her apartment's security system sent an alert. Someone was at the front desk, asking to be let up. Her doorman sent a message. "A man named Jake is here to see you. Should I send him away?" Victoria stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, calmly, she typed back, "Yes, do not let him up." She imagined the scene downstairs. Jake standing at the desk, awkward and unsure, waiting for her to come rushing down, expecting her to want to see him. But she didn't. She wasn't that woman anymore. The next morning, Victoria decided to put an end to it once and for all. She picked up her phone and typed out a final message. "Victoria? Jake, I think it's time you stop reaching out. Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it here." A few minutes later, the typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, his response came. "Jake, I just wanted to talk. I miss you, Em. I miss us." Victoria sighed. He still didn't get it. "Victoria, you didn't miss me when you left. You didn't miss me when you replaced me. And you sure as hell didn't miss me when you called me boring. But now that you know what I'm worth, suddenly you miss me?" This time, the typing bubble didn't come back. She put her phone down, feeling lighter than she had in years. That afternoon, Victoria went out for lunch with friends. She laughed, she drank good wine, she enjoyed the life she had built for herself. Not once did she think about Jake, because for the first time in a long time, she was exactly where she was meant to be.